The dust hadn't settled on Main Street when Jake Morrison rode into Copper Ridge that scorching July afternoon. His weathered leather chaps bore the marks of 3 weeks driving cattle across the Wyoming Territory, and his horse, a sturdy paint named Thunder, snorted with exhaustion. The familiar sounds of a frontier town hammering from the blacksmith shop, children playing in the street, women chatting on porches were conspicuously absent. "Something ain't right here," Jake muttered, his hand instinctively moving to the Colt .45 on his hip dot as he approached the town center. The reason for the eerie silence became clear. Windows were shattered, overturned wagons littered the street, and the bank's heavy wooden door hung askew on its hinges. Outside the sheriff's office, Doc Williams knelt beside a prone figure. "Doc, what in Sam Hill happened here?" Jake called. "Out," dismounting quickly. Doc Williams looked up, his usually steady hands trembling as he pressed a bloodied cloth against Sheriff Patterson's shoulder. "Jake, thank the Lord you're here. The Dalton gang hit us hard about 2 hours ago. 20 men, maybe more. They took everything from the mine office, 3 months' worth of gold shipments." Sheriff Patterson's eyes fluttered open. "JAK, they headed north toward Devil's Canyon, my deputies. They scattered like tumbleweeds in a tornado. Can't blame them, really. 20 against 3 ain't fighting odds." "How much gold we talking about, Sheriff?" Jake asked, kneeling beside the wounded lawman. "Near $30,000 worth," Patterson wheezed. "That's every family's livelihood in this town. The miners, the shopkeepers, even the preachers. Salary, without that gold, Copper Ridge dies." Jake stood slowly, his jaw set with determination. The prairie wind whipped his brown hair beneath his weathered hat as he surveyed the devastated town. Children peered fearfully from behind their mothers' skirts, and old-timers sat on the saloon porch, shaking their heads in defeat. "Jake, you can't be thinking what I think you're thinking," Doc Williams said, reading the expression on the cowboy's face. 20 men is suicide, even for someone with your reputation. "Doc, I've been riding these plains since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. I know every canyon, every water hole, every hiding spot between here and the Montana border. The Dalton gang might have numbers, but they don't have the home advantage." From his saddlebags, Jake retrieved extra ammunition, jerky, and a worn leather map marked with his own notations from years of cattle drives. The map showed water sources, natural shelters, and dangerous passages that most folks never knew existed. "Sheriff, which direction did they head exactly?" Jake asked, studying the terrain markers on his map. "North-northeast, toward Devil's Canyon, like I said." "But Jake, that's rough country up there. Lots of places for an ambush." "That works both ways, Sheriff." Jake checked his rifle, a Winchester 1873 that had never failed him in 15 years. "A frontier life. I'm not planning to ride up to them guns blazing. This requires a different kind of approach." As Jake prepared to mount Thunder, Martha Henderson, the schoolteacher, approached hesitantly. "Mr. Morrison, my husband was working the mine when they came through. They took him and 2 other men as guides. If you're really going after them ... I'll bring them back, ma'am, all of them." Jake's voice carried the quiet confidence of a man who had faced down rustlers, survived blizzards, and navigated territorial disputes. "But I need you folks to stay calm and keep watch. If I'm not back by tomorrow sundown, send word to the territorial marshal in Cheyenne." As Jake rode out of Copper Ridge, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the prairie. Behind him, the town held its collective breath. Ahead lay 20 desperate men with enough gold to disappear forever, and terrain that could kill a man as easily as a bullet. But Jake Morrison had something the Dalton gang didn't expect 30 years of: survival instincts and an intimate knowledge of land that had tried to break him countless times and failed. The trail north from Copper Ridge led through increasingly treacherous terrain. Jake followed the gang's tracks with the practiced eye of someone who had tracked everything from cattle to coyotes across the frontier. 20 horses left unmistakable. Signs, broken brush, disturbed rocks, and the occasional horseshoe print in patches of soft earth. "They're pushing hard, Thunder," Jake murmured to his horse as they navigated a narrow ravine. Probably figure to reach the old mining camp at Skeleton Creek by nightfall. The abandoned mining camp had been deserted for 5 years after the silver played out, but Jake knew it well. During harsh winters, he'd sheltered there while moving cattle to winter pasture. If the Dalton gang holed up there, they'd have good defensive positions but limited escape routes. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Jake spotted smoke rising in the distance, a campfire exactly where he'd predicted. He dismounted and led Thunder up a rocky slope that provided a vantage point overlooking the camp. Through his field glasses, he could see the gang had indeed taken shelter in the old mining buildings. 21 men, counting the leader, Jake counted methodically. 3 hostages tied up near the main building. Sentries posted, but they're not expecting trouble this far out. Jake studied the layout carefully. The gang had chosen their position well. The buildings provided cover, and the approach from the south offered little concealment. But Jake knew something they didn't. There was an old mine shaft that connected to the camp from the north side of the hill. As darkness fell, Jake made his move. He left Thunder hidden in a grove of cottonwoods with enough grass and water for the night. Moving on foot, he circled wide around the camp, using skills learned from tracking game and avoiding hostile Native American war parties in his younger days. The mine shaft entrance was partially collapsed, but Jake had explored it years earlier. He squeezed through the narrow opening, using matches to navigate the treacherous underground passage. The tunnel was longer than he remembered, and twice he had to backtrack when passages proved impassable. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, Jake emerged inside the camp perimeter, hidden behind a pile of mining equipment. The gang had grown careless with their success. Several men were already drunk on whiskey they'd stolen from the town saloon. "Boss, you sure about heading to Montana Territory?" one of the gang members asked. "That's a long ride with this much gold." "Shut up and keep drinking, Hayes," came the reply from a bearded man Jake recognized as Black Pete Dalton from wanted posters. "By the time they organize a proper posse, we'll be across the border with new names and enough money to live like kings." Jake crept closer, noting the positions of the sentries and the location of the stolen gold. Dozens of leather pouches stacked near the main building. The 3 hostages sat bound but appeared unharmed, which was more mercy than the Dalton gang usually showed. Moving with the stealth of a seasoned hunter, Jake began implementing his plan. He'd learned long ago that sometimes brains worked better than bullets, especially when outnumbered 20 to 1. His first target was their horses without mounts. The gang would be stranded in hostile territory with limited supplies. Working systematically, Jake cut the picket ropes of the horses farthest from the camp, sending them scattering into the night with gentle slaps on their hindquarters. The animals, already spooked by the unfamiliar surroundings, bolted into the darkness with thundering hooves. "What in blazes was that?" shouted one of the sentries. "Probably just a cougar spooking the horses," another replied. "They've been jumpy all evening." Jake smiled grimly. By his count, he'd just reduced their mobility by half. Now came the more dangerous part of his plan: getting close enough to free the hostages and create enough confusion to level the playing field. The success of his mission depended on timing, patience, and 30 years of frontier survival skills that couldn't be taught in any school. Jake waited until the darkest hour before dawn, when human alertness naturally wanes, and even experienced sentries tend to grow careless. Most of the gang had succumbed to exhaustion and stolen whiskey, leaving only 4 men on watch still. Dangerous odds, but better than 20. Moving like a shadow, Jake approached the building where the hostages were held. He recognized Tom Henderson, Martha's husband, along with 2 younger miners from Copper Ridge. Using his knife, he carefully cut their bonds. "Don't make a sound," Jake whispered. "When I give the signal, crawl toward that pile of lumber and wait for my next move." Tom Henderson's eyes widened with recognition and hope. The 3 men nodded their understanding, relief evident on their faces despite the continued danger. Jake's next objective was the gold itself. He couldn't carry $30,000 worth of precious metal alone, but he could make it extremely difficult for the gang to transport. Working methodically, he began redistributing the heavy pouches, hiding some in abandoned mine shafts and scattering others in locations only he would remember. As the first pale light of dawn began to creep across the prairie, Jake initiated the final phase of his plan. He'd noticed several barrels of mining powder left behind by the previous occupants, still good despite their age. Strategically placing small charges near the remaining horses and the gang's supply wagon, Jake prepared to turn their advantage into chaos. The explosion, when it came, shattered the morning silence like thunder. Horses reared and bolted, men stumbled from buildings half-dressed and confused, and smoke filled the air. In the pandemonium, Jake's rifle spoke repeatedly. Precise shots that wounded rather than killed, disabling gun hands and legs to remove threats without unnecessary bloodshed. "It's just one man," Black Pete Dalton roared, finally grasping the situation. "Find him and kill him." But Jake was already moving, using the terrain and buildings like a chess master using pieces. His intimate knowledge of the mining camps layout gave him advantages the gang couldn't counter. He appeared from unexpected angles, fired accurate shots, then melted away before return fire could find him. "Boss, the gold's gone," one of the gang members shouted. "Half the bags are missing. And most of the horses are scattered to hell and back," added another dot. As the sun climbed higher, Jake's strategy became clear. He wasn't trying to defeat 20 men in direct combat. He was systematically destroying their ability to escape with their prize. Without horses, without supplies, and with several members wounded, the Dalton gang found themselves trapped in increasingly desperate circumstances. "Morrison," Black Pete finally called out, "I know it's you. You want to talk terms?" "I'm listening, Dalton," Jake replied from his concealed position. "Here's my offer. We ride out, leave the gold, and nobody else gets hurt." "Counteroffer," Jake called back. "You all throw down your weapons, and I guarantee you'll live to see trial instead of dying out here like dogs." The negotiation that followed lasted another hour, but Jake held all the cards. The gang members, faced with the reality of being stranded in hostile territory without supplies or transportation, began surrendering one by one. By full sunrise, all 20 men sat with their hands bound, waiting for the arrival of the territorial marshal Jake had sent Tom Henderson to fetch Dot, as promised in the legend that would grow around this day. The prairie around the mining camp was indeed scattered with golden traces, pouches of gold dust and nuggets that had spilled during the chaotic night, creating literal tracks of gold across the landscape. Jake Morrison rode back into Copper Ridge 3 days later, leading a wagon train that included the recovered gold, the 20 captured gang members, and 3 grateful hostages. The town's celebration lasted well into the night, but Jake himself remained characteristically modest about his achievement. "Wasn't about being brave," he told the gathering crowd at the saloon. "Was about knowing the land, thinking ahead, and sometimes realizing that the best way to win a fight is to make sure it never becomes a fair fight in the first place."